And then, Richard, you can just shoot me a text when you're ready to start the presentation and I'll come in and put it on full screen.
Okay, thank you. Is everything on now?
Yep, you're recording, you're all set.
Good. You want that microphone closer for you? That's good, that's fine, it stays there. We'll call the meeting to order. This is the Ecotoxicology Committee of the Commission for Conservation for the Environment for the City of Binghamton. Thursday, August 8th, 2024, 10:05 a.m. at City Hall in the work session room of the clerk's office. Roll call. Darius Bang. And Darius said he will be joining us on Zoom in a minute. Okay. He overslept. And Richard Ginnasio, myself, I'm here. And Hadassah, who's the ex officio member from the city council, is not here. So since Darius prepared the minutes, I will forego the minutes acceptance, the approval of the minutes. And
hello. I'm sorry.
Darius.
Yeah, my apologies.
No problem. Welcome.
Thank you.
And so I'll put you down as present.
Okay.
I just roll call. You just came in right after the roll call. So you have the minutes from the last meeting.
Yes, I sent them out to you and to
So I just had a couple of suggestions. In the definition for ecotoxicology, where you say that it deals with toxins up to the biosphere. What I said was actually from the molecular level to the individual, all the way up to the community and biosphere. So it's the whole gamut. Okay. And then when we have a vote, hi Scott. Hello, have a seat, please. When we have a vote, and you put down all in favor, when you look at that 5 years from now, we might think that's a question, all in favor. So maybe just put down, like you have, motion, Ginnasio, second, Bang, whatever, right? And then put vote, colon, approved or disapproved, and then parentheses 2 to 0, whatever the vote is. Okay?
that sounds good.
Okay, and then Hadassah's not here. And that's all. If you make those corrections, then we can approve the minutes with the corrections.
All right.
Okay?
Definitely.
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay.
Or you make the motion actually, because I'm the chair.
Okay.
And I'll second it.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, second, all in favor? Aye. 2-0. Public comment. Do we have any public comment from anybody here? Jim? So motion to close public comment.
A motion to close it.
Second, approved. I'm going to waive, I'm going to propose that we motion to waive the committee task force reports because we're just getting set up with that. And we'll do it next time when we have our full schedules in place. We'll have more time to pursue that.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Motion,
So I'll motion to forgo that.
second. In favor? And unanimously approved. They may not be able to, well, you'll be able to see that when you do the minutes, right? You'll be
Yeah.
able to So. Okay. And so, new business also, I don't think, do we have any new business?
Not at the moment, I don't think.
No, so motion to close the new business.
Motion to close new business.
Second, all in favor, aye. And future meetings, I think we'll also leave till the end of the month. When we have our schedules, I would like to keep this day, but we might have to change the time of the day. If possible, you know, we don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
So we'll work that out as well.
Mm.
So next, we're going to go to the main part of our meeting today, which is we have a special guest. We're honored to have Professor Paul Corbett here. Connett.
Yeah.
Professor Paul Connett, a retired professor of chemistry. And he has been working for decades on this issue of fluoridation of the water supply. And he's come here today to present the scientific evidence of why Binghamton should stop fluoridating its water. Professor Connett, I'll turn the floor over to you.
We're only going to need full screen here.
No, I have to tell Samantha now. I'm just waiting for the slideshow. to
Yes.
come up. And Professor Paul Connett, you are a former resident of Binghamton.
Yes, my wife and I, who's here, we lived in Binghamton from 2012 to 2021. Until we moved to Exeter, New Hampshire. We really enjoyed our time in Binghamton. We're sorry to leave, actually. Made a lot of friends here. Especially in the battle in Endicott against the lithium-ion battery. They called it recycling, we called it incineration plant, which was a successful battle. We made a lot of friends doing it, and we had to fight this plan during COVID. Can you imagine?
And
Organizing during COVID.
Let me ask you a question. Since you were living in Binghamton, did you drink the fluoridated water when you were living here?
No, we drove to Lyle, near Waverly Point, Whitney Point.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd have a whole back of the car was full of empty bottles, and we'd fill them. Got about 40 gallons each time, and the water is lovely. If you haven't tried it, you should. Spring water, Lyle.
Okay, so we're going to have a presentation, and then I ask that you hold your questions till after the presentation. We'll have ample opportunity to ask questions. That's good. I'm gonna go and see if she got the message, because I can send it to her.
Paul, I don't know if you remember, I'm Scott Lawfer. So I am still with the Sierra Club.
Oh, the Sierra Club,
And
yes.
we came on board with Novern Broome.
Oh, good. Good.
Once we realized there's
Oh, the other
PFAS
yeah.
Yes,
involved with
Yes.
battery recycling.
yeah. Yeah, that was a great campaign. Good community effort.
Let me just reach, would you mind passing me
Yeah.
that mouse? Thank you so much.
Yeah, we just went full screen.
So you just want full screen?
Yeah,
right now?
full-
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha. So I'll just switch it to speaker view for now.
Of the PowerPoint, full screen of the PowerPoint.
Oh, gotcha. Alrighty, that's a little different, just a little bit. And did Sam already pull that up? There it is. Perfect. Okay, so I just have to share the screen with this.
Here, I can.
Sure.
Sorry.
Oh, I see, there we are on top.
There you go. Wasn't sure if you had it
See us
pulled
up
up.
in that little square on top. And then
Thanks.
Darius is
There we
right.
go.
Okay,
There we
that's
go.
great, thank you.
Shall I start?
That's fine, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
You can use either the mouse or the forward.
Well, thank you
Thank
for
you very much.
inviting me to give this talk on my reasons for opposing fluoridation and my arguments why Binghamton should stop fluoridation. I'm a retired professor of chemistry who specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology. I have spent the last 28 years since 1996, when my wife forced me to get involved with this issue. I didn't want it because the view of people opposed to fluoridation, but they were crazy people, and that's not a good reputation to have if you're a professor at a university. So I didn't want the issue, but I did read what she gave me, and I was appalled and have been opposing it ever since. I helped to found the science-based organization Fluoride Action Network in 2000 and was the director for many years. And Ellen has been the webmaster and the secretary for all those years. I co-authored the book, The Case Against Fluoride, with two other professors, Spedding Micklem from Edinburgh, sadly he's passed away, and James Beck, sadly he now has dementia. So if you like, I'm the only one left standing. But the book itself, every argument that we put in that book was backed up with the literature. There are, in fact, 80 pages of references to that book. It was published in 2010, and I think it's fair to say that every position that we took in that book has been vindicated, and the scientific evidence has overwhelmingly backed up our arguments. So I will give you, first of all, some factual information, fairly non-controversial, then explain why fluoridation is a bad medical practice, provide the strong scientific evidence of harm to different tissues, give a ringside seat on the fluoride IQ studies, and then the weak scientific evidence of benefit, a better strategy for fighting tooth decay. So the background information. Fluoridation is the deliberate addition of chemical compounds which release free fluoride ions into the public drinking water. The reason, in a moment, is to fight tooth decay. But the point to note is you're not treating the water. You're not making the water safe or changing the flavor or anything. You are simply using the public water supply to deliver this drug, this fluoride. Most countries in the world do not fluoridate their water. More than half of the people drinking fluoridated water live in North America. So it's ironic that people living in North America think that fluoridation is the norm. Everybody does it. What's the problem? Well, in the world, everybody doesn't do it. The norm is not fluoridating your water. Most of Europe, 97% of European countries do not fluoridate their water. Fluoride is not a nutrient. There's no process in the human body that needs fluoride to function properly, none. Fluoride's benefit to teeth is predominantly topical. It works on the outside of the teeth, not from inside the body. And here's a statement from the CDC, which they agree. They say laboratory and epidemiologic research suggests that fluoride prevents dental caries predominantly after eruption of the tooth into the mouth, and its actions primarily are topical. The fluoride ion is very toxic. It interferes with many biochemical processes. For example, it inhibits many enzymes. It's a complicated issue, but there's an excellent review by Barbier, and here's a picture from Barbier's review paper, and I think you can get an indication of just how complex this issue of fluoride's interference with biochemistry can be. Nature has developed ways of reducing the toxic threat posed by fluoride. Now, this is interesting. Nature wouldn't have mechanisms to get rid of fluoride from tissues if there was a reason for keeping the fluoride there. And for some lower level organisms like bacteria and fungi, fluoride switches on genes which produce fluoride exporting proteins, so-called FEX proteins. And these proteins go to the membrane and act as a pump. They pump excess fluoride out of the cells. Now, when you get to mammals, we don't have those pumps. What we have are kidneys, and the kidneys excrete about 50% of the fluoride we ingest each day. Children actually excrete more in their early years. Now, the remainder of the fluoride rapidly is taken up by the bones, sequestered in the bones. And I believe that that is to prevent the fluorides attacking the soft tissues, the inner workings of the cell. You trap it in the bones. Mother's milk contains very little fluoride, which is important evidence, because if the baby needed fluoride, where would you expect to find it? You expect to find it in mother's milk. It's not there. According to the National Research Council, the level of fluoride in mother's milk is 0.004 parts per million. And so mother's milk is essentially protecting the baby. But when you fluoridate the water, you lose that protection. If the baby is bottle fed with using tap water with 0.7 parts per million, the baby's getting 100 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby. 100 times more fluoride, if you like, than nature intended. However, that's the good news. The breast milk protects the baby. The bad news is the fluoride could cross the placental membrane. And so the fetus is exposed to fluoride from day one. Any fluoride that the mother ingests is passed on to the baby. So the fetal tissues, including the brain, are exposed to the biochemically active fluoride ion from day one of pregnancy. Now, the Federal Drug Administration does not regulate water fluoridation. The FDA's position is that fluoride is an unapproved drug because it's not been tested for efficacy and safety using the standard clinical trials. It hasn't been done. So it's left to the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate fluoride. They regulate fluoride in drinking water like many other pollutants, lead, arsenic, mercury, and so on. And this is a rare example of regulating a pollutant, which is also an additive, is also deliberately added to the water. So the EPA regulates it. In 1986, the EPA set the safe drinking water standard for fluoride, the so-called maximum contaminant level, at 4 parts per million, 4 milligrams per liter. That is a federally enforceable standard. And it set that standard of 4 parts per million based upon, believe it or not, crippling skeletal fluorosis. This is, the fluoride has poisoned the bone so much that the backbone is solid and it cripples people. You know, that you have to ask why they should use crippling skeletal fluorosis for their endpoint, rather than the first symptoms of skeletal fluorosis, which are like arthritis. That would have been a more rational thing to protect the public from. The Oral Health Division of the Centers for Disease Control recommends a level of 0.7 parts per million for reducing tooth decay. The mandate of the CDC's Oral Health Division is to promote fluoridation, which it has done vigorously for decades. There is no comparable division at the CDC that is carefully monitoring health concerns. So when this agency says fluoridation is safe and effective, you've got to remember that they're really only concerned about the effective half of this thing. They are not monitoring the safety. No one else is. Another body that vigorously promotes fluoridation is the American Dental Association, which sounds like a professional body, but it's really a trade association. It's more interested in the interests of the profession, the dentist profession. The chemicals used that are not pharmaceutical grade, but are industrial waste products. And the main one used is a chemical called hexafluorosilicic acid. The formula is easy to understand than the name, H2SiF6. And this is obtained from the scrubbing systems of the phosphate fertilizer industry. This scrubbing liquor is not treated in any way. And the hexafluorosilicic acid, along with contaminants, gets into trucks and is sent all around the country to put into the drinking water. So not only do you get the hexafluorosilicic acid, you get things like arsenic and lead contaminants. Now I want to just talk a little bit about propaganda versus science. I'm a scientist and I do not conduct propaganda, at least I try not to. The Center for Disease Control in 1999 had this to say: fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. Now, I don't know if they realized what they were doing, but this statement is quoted nearly every day somewhere in the world by a dentist, a doctor, a government official, a journalist, an editor. It really has been a propaganda coup to make that statement. However, when you examine the review on which is the basis for that conclusion, you find it's rather weak. First of all, it was published in Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report, which is the CDC's own in-house journal, which is not peer-reviewed. If it's good enough for the CDC, it's good enough for this journal. The review was authored by just two people, Scott Tomar and Susan Griffin. Now, Scott Tomar is a dental researcher who'd never done any research on fluoridation before this paper. His expertise is on smokeless tobacco. And Susan Griffin is not even a scientist, she's an economist. So these two people get the task of writing this paper, and it's used as a basis of assuring people essentially that fluoridation is the best thing since sliced bread, and obviously it's perfectly safe. Now, Tomar and Griffin provide this graphic as evidence of fluoridation's effectiveness. Now, in this graphic, what is this graphic? That blue line that's coming down is a measure of tooth decay. It's the mean decayed, missing, and filled teeth for 12-year-olds. Mean DMFT for 12-year-olds. And over the period that they're looking at, the 60s, the mid-60s to the mid-90s, you see on that graph that the tooth decay is coming down over that period. And over the same period, the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water had gone up. Voila! One thing causes another. So they're making a fundamental mistake of concluding that two things which are happening at the same time are cause and effect. Obviously, it's an association. It's important. It's a good starting point for further studies, but it can't be taken as proof. And if they had looked at the literature, they would have found that the World Health Organization had been tracking the same metrics of tooth decay in 12-year-olds throughout the world. And they have found that tooth decay in 12-year-olds, DMFTs, have been coming down as fast in non-fluoridated countries as fluoridated ones. Now, if Tomar and Griffin had known that this database existed, what they did, they're showing their incompetence to put that graph up as evidence of fluoride's benefit. But if they did know that that data was out there, and it's hard to believe that they did a thorough research and didn't find that, then you have to say it's fraud. They're clearly misleading the American public. So for over 70 years, the fluoridation debate has been controlled largely by the dental profession. And obviously this profession has a single focus on teeth. Most dentists do not have an expertise on other health issues. And I asked a cartoonist to tell me what a proponent of fluoridation, how they see us. They see us as giant mouths, lots of teeth and little legs on them. That's how they see us. Whereas the opponents of fluoridation, he says, well, they see kidneys, they see thyroid glands and stomachs, and all those kind of things. Well, joking aside, this is what the American Dental Association said in a white paper in 1979, which I think reveals that they are propagandists and not scientists. They said, individual dentists must be convinced that they need not be familiar with scientific reports of laboratory and field investigations on fluoridation to be effective participants in the promotion program, and that non-participation is overt neglect of professional responsibility. Now, I find that an absolutely astounding definition of what being a professional is, as far as the AD is concerned. I can't imagine any other profession saying to their members, oh, you don't have to read the science to go out and promote this practice. And by the way, if you don't promote this practice, even though you haven't read the science, then you're being unprofessional. Absolutely extraordinary. So now let me explain why I think that fluoridation is a bad medical practice. We, or engineers, can control the concentration of the fluoride that we add to the water. In other words, we can determine how much milligrams of fluoride we've added per liter of water. That's the dose. We can control that pretty well. But what we cannot control is the dose that people get. And that is measured in milligrams of fluoride per day. And the dosage, which is measured as milligrams per kilogram body weight per day. Neither dose nor dosage can be controlled by the engineers at the waterworks, because it's determined by how much water people drink, and some people drink a huge amount of water, and how much fluoride they're getting from other sources, from their diet, from toothpaste, and so on. So this is a lack of control is very serious. It defies pharmaceutical principles. One dose does not fit all. People have different sensitivities to any toxic substance. Once it's in the water, it goes to everyone, regardless of their age, their health, and their nutritional status. It violates the individual's right to informed consent to medical treatment. In other words, it's unethical. The community is doing to everyone what a doctor can do to no one. It is unethical to force medicine on people. None of the agencies that endorse and promote fluoridation are monitoring the fluoride levels in citizens' urine, blood, or bones. As far as how much fluoride people are getting, we're flying blind. No medical personnel are monitoring citizens' health for side effects. No. As I said, we're flying blind. Now let's talk about the science on fluoride's threat to different tissues other than the teeth. Well, it does threaten the teeth too, but a good place to start this is with a review that was published in 2006 by the National Research Council. I actually gave testimony to the review panel. Their review was fluoride in drinking water and a review of the EPA standards. It was requested by the EPA, this review, and it was paid for by the EPA. Remember that, because the EPA has ignored their conclusions. Now, the good thing about the NRC here is they produced the most balanced panel ever used in a government review on this issue. They had 3 people that were known to be pro-fluoridation, 3 people that were known to be anti-fluoridation, which included one professor from Binghamton University, Dr. Bob Isaacson from the psychology department, and it includes 6 people that hadn't declared a public position. It was very thorough, this review. They thought they're going to do it in 1 year. It took them 3 years. And by the time it came out, it was 500 pages long, and it had over 1,000 references. When it was published, it was the textbook of the toxicology on fluoride. Now, what they report is that fluoride, now we've got to make a distinction here. The 2 things. Does fluoride damage tissues? Answer is yes. Does fluoridation damage tissues? That's the controversy. So be careful with the wording. Fluoride damages teeth, dental fluorosis. That's a damaging topic of the enamel. That happens in fluoridation, with fluoridation. So both fluoride and fluoridation damage the tooth enamel. 2, fluoride damages bones, causing skeletal fluorosis. The first symptoms are identical to arthritis, and further exposure leads to brittle bones. And we do think that fluoridation is doing both of those things. Fluoride is an endocrine disruptor, meaning it interferes with hormones, and hormones are chemicals which regulate body chemistry. They're produced at different times in different glands to control and regulate chemistry. Think of the woman's menstrual cycle. That is tightly regulated by hormones. Fluoride lowers thyroid function. Thyroid function, the thyroids are in the neck here, and they produce a hormone called thyroid hormone, and that is very important for development and regulation of body chemistry. Probably one of the most important hormones in the body. Fluoride accumulates in the human pineal gland, which is a little gland located between the 2 hemispheres of the brain, and it produces melatonin, which has many functions in the body, certainly controlling sleep patterns. It produces melatonin and possibly causing cancer. So there's a huge amount of research being done on the pineal gland. But right now, what we know is that fluoride accumulates in the calcification parts of that cell, of that gland. And fluoride damages the brain. And most of the rest of my talk is going to focus on that evidence. This is what they said in their report from 2006. All members of the committee agreed that there is scientific evidence that under certain conditions, fluoride can weaken bones and increase the risk of fractures. And one of the most important bones for fracture is the hip bone, the femoral neck of the hip bone. Since this review, in 2021, Helty, in a study from Sweden, showed that an increase of hip fractures in postmenopausal women is associated with fluoride exposure in the range of 0 to 1 parts per million. Fluoride, Sweden doesn't fluoridate, but their natural levels overlap with the level at which we fluoridate. So that's a very serious study. They said in 2006, several lines of information indicate an effect of fluoride exposure on thyroid function. And since then, Malin in 2018, in a study done in Canada, a high-rated study, showed that an increase of TSH, which is a marker for underactive thyroid gland, if your thyroid gland is underactive, you will produce this thyroid stimulating hormone. So that goes up, you're underactive. And what she found was that in fluoridated communities, women who already had low iodine intake, borderline or outright iodine deficiency, their situation was made worse. For those women, their TSH levels already increased by low iodine intake were further increased by fluoridation. And they also said in 2006, it is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with functions of the brain. Bob Isaacson played an important role here because he'd already published a study which fluoride had damaged rat brain and had symptoms like Alzheimer's disease. Now, the NRC concluded that the MCL of 4 parts per million was unprotected of health. And the EPA, remember, that paid for and requested this review, should conduct a new health risk assessment to determine a safer level than the 1986 level. After 18 years, the EPA has failed to do this. Many of the endpoints discussed by the NRC occur at levels far lower than cause crippling skeletal fluorosis. The EPA is simply not doing its job. 18 years. They requested this review from this national body. The body says your MCL is too high. You need to do a new health risk assessment. And for 18 years, they haven't done it. That agency is not protecting us. That agency is protecting the water fluoridation program. Fluoride lowers IQ, and we at the Fluoride Action Network have had a ringside seat of these studies, starting in 1996, which coincided with the publication of the first 2 IQ studies in China that appeared in English. So since 2000, since we've had our webpage, we've been uploading all these studies on fluoride's lowering of IQ on our webpage. And as of 2002, FAN had listed 76 human studies indicating fluoride lowers IQ. And if you go to our website, unfortunately, it's being upgraded right now, so I'm not sure how much of this you can find. But if you go there, you will find 76 IQ studies listed. Each study is described, and each study is, there's a link to the full study in each case. This has been a wonderful service of FAN to the public and to scientists. Many of these studies were carried out in rural areas of China, which are endemic for dental fluorosis and skeletal fluorosis. And the Chinese, unlike the Americans, were eager to find out what level of fluoride caused damage and if there were other tissues being damaged. So their CDC has been studying more extensively than any other agency in the world the health impacts of fluoride, where our CDC is covering up the health effects. An important meta-analysis of 27 of these studies was published in 2012 by a group from Harvard, Choi and Philippe Grandjean, who is from Harvard University and is one of the great neuroscientists in the world. He was the one that established the risks of mercury to neurodevelopment, and he's a specialist in risk assessment. He edits major journals. Anyway, they looked at these 27 studies. First of all, they acknowledged there were weaknesses in many of these Chinese studies. They didn't have enough information. They needed more information on possible confounders. However, they added to this, they said the results were remarkably consistent. Even though these 27 studies were carried out over 19 years, they were carried out by different research groups and carried out in different geographical areas. 26 out of the 27 found this consistent result of a lowering of IQ between the high fluoride village and the low fluoride village. And the average lowering was half a standard deviation of some 7 IQ points. Now, at the population level, remember, fluoridation is a population measure. We do something to the whole population. On the population level, a shift downwards of 7 IQ points or even 5 IQ points is very, very serious. Let me explain. This is a typical IQ curve, very roughly drawn by myself. The left-hand axis, that is the number of kids in the community with a specific IQ, if you like, for the country, for the whole of the United States, the number of kids that have a specific IQ. And at the bottom, you have the range of possible IQ from 0 to 150 or what have you. Now, it's not the average level of 100 that is of the major concern. The major concern is the area under the curve at these 2 points. An IQ above 130, children are thought to be very bright. And that's where you're going to find your geniuses as you go towards the tip. So that green area is the fraction of your total population that you're looking at that has an IQ above 130. And down at the other end, the magenta area is the fraction of children have an IQ less than 70. Those children are literally mentally handicapped and will need care. Now, what happens when you shift over downwards by 5 IQs for the whole population? Remember, we're fluoridating the whole population. You see that the average will go from 100 to 95. Well, a teacher, a parent wouldn't notice that difference between two children in a class or two siblings. However, we can easily notice what's happening at the tails. Look at that area under the curve, which is very bright children. You've halved it with a shift downwards of 5. Look at the curve magenta with mentally handicapped. You've approximately doubled that by shifting the whole curve down by 5 IQ points. This is incredibly serious. And no government should be putting into the drinking water supply a substance that has the potential to do that. Now I want to deal with 3 important studies which, beginning in 2017, were financed by a government agency, the National Institute of Environmental Health Science, which for a number of years was headed up by a hero of mine, Dr. Linda Birnbaum. Anyway, this first study, Bashash 2017, it was a bombshell. This was a study done in Mexico in which they looked at the exposure of pregnant women to fluoride by measuring the fluoride in their urine and the IQ of their offspring. It was a 12-year, multi-million-dollar study funded by the EPA, NIH, and NIEHF. Well-experienced authors controlled for many possible confounding variables. All those confounding variables we wanted to see in China, Iran, Mexico, and so on, they controlled for those. There are some of the confounding variables, just everything that you could think of. And this is not surprising. When you have a study funded by the NIEHS, it's going to have to be high quality to get millions of dollars. They're going to look at your methodology and decide whether it's worth funding or not. The study examined approximately 300 mother-offspring pairs. Both exposure and outcomes were determined on an individual basis. This is another dramatic change over the Chinese studies, because basically they measured the fluoride exposure at community level and they averaged the IQ of the community. Here you're looking at individual exposure and individual impact. The mother's exposure to fluoride during pregnancy was determined by analysis of their urine, which is an important measure because it measures total fluoride exposure, and it's independent of the source of fluoride. You don't care whether it's come from toothpaste, salt, or water. It gives you the total exposure to the parent, the mother. Now, the IQ of the women's children was measured at age 4 and again at 6 to 12. For every milligram per liter increase in the mother's urine fluoride, the children lost an average of 5 to 6 IQ points. That's a very large effect. I explained the significance of that. Now, here's a rough diagram of the scatter plot. If you look at the bottom axis, this is the maternal urine fluoride levels in the United States, as best we knew them in 2017. The range was about 0.6 to 1.5. And if you look at the data from Bashash, that would mean for women in America, their average fluoride levels in their urine would predict a range of 6 IQ points lost. The ADA argued that this study was not relevant to the United States because Mexico does not fluoridate its water. There, the source is fluoridated water. But of course, that's absolute nonsense, because the measure of fluoride in the urine It doesn't matter whether it comes from toothpaste, salt, or water. And moreover, a study done by Till and others in 2018, they looked at fluoride levels in pregnant women in Canada. The left-hand bar is in fluoridated communities. That's what pregnant women's level of urine was. The non-fluoridated communities, the second bar, you see simply by fluoridating the water, you double the number of the level of fluoride in the urine of pregnant women in Canada. But look at the left-hand bar and the right-hand bar. The right-hand bar is the level found in the Bashar study, the Mexican study, 0.91 parts per million. Over in Canada, it's 0.87, almost the same. So the ADA nonsense means nothing. The second of the big three NIEHS study came in 2019, which was another Canadian study by Green. And this was published in JAMA Pediatrics, which is one of the leading pediatric journal in the world. Now, they replicated the Mexican study except for one thing. They found a drop of IQ in the boys associated with the mother's urine, but not in the girls. And that has been used by proponents of fluoridation to junk the study. But they shouldn't have done, because they also measured the fluoride exposure in the mother by estimating the daily exposure in milligrams per day based upon her food and the water levels. And there they found an IQ drop for boys and girls. And now, here comes the third of the big three studies funded by NIEHS. This was a study published in Environmental International, another leading journal for this kind of work. And the lead author was Christine Till. Children who were bottle fed as babies in fluoridated communities in Canada had lower IQ than children who were bottle fed in non-fluoridated communities. So here are two groups of children based on their cohorts, which the only difference that they could ascertain was one group was bottle fed with fluoridated water, the other was bottle fed with non-fluoridated water, and there was a drop of 9 IQ points on the nonverbal scale. That is huge. And their recommendation is, after adjusting for fetal exposure, we found that fluoride exposure during infancy predicts diminished nonverbal intelligence in children. In the absence of any dental benefit from fluoride consumption in the first 6 months of pregnancy, it is prudent to limit fluoride exposure by using non-fluoridated water or water with lower fluoride contents as a formula diluent. Now, since these studies, no, actually just before these studies, FAN has taken 2 initiatives, which I can't talk much about because I don't have time. In 2016, FAN requested the National Toxicology Program, which is a program that advises all federal agencies on questions on toxicology. We asked them to review the neurotoxicology of fluoride. This is in 2016, before the NIEHS studies, and they agreed to do so. And they've been doing it for 8 years. Then in 2017, FAN and other groups sued the EPA under provisions in TSCA, the Toxic Substances and Control Act, to ban the deliberate addition of fluoride to the drinking water because it posed an unreasonable risk to the brain development of children. Now, I would like to talk a lot about this. Just a few words. Here's the conclusion of the NTP review draft, when the first ones came out, I think in 1922. Conclusion. NTP concludes that fluoride is presumed to be a cognitive neurodevelopment hazard to humans. Not many people know about that conclusion because we now know that people from the dental lobby suppressed it. They forced the NTP to stop this review and turn to a state of the science and a meta-analysis. So continue. This conclusion is based upon a consistent pattern of findings in human studies across several different populations, showing that higher fluoride exposure is associated with decreased IQ or other cognitive impairments in children. So they're now reviewing not only the Chinese studies, but also these more higher quality studies from the NIEHS funding. Now, when it came down to the state of the science report, we know now, based upon FOIA requests, that the ADA, the American Fluoridation Society, and the National Institute of Dental Training Research applied pressure on the NIH, the National Institute of Health, to get their deputy director, Rachel Levine, to prevent the publication of this NTP State of the Science report. Now, I can bring two more people, they can do it via Zoom, two more people to talk, one about this review, Chris Nura, and two about the Tusker lawsuit. We're happy to do that. But let me tell you where things are at the moment. We've had that lawsuit. It was done in two stages, in 2020, and it ended in February of this year. And the law judge, okay. And the trial was based upon the NTP review and some more recent studies. And the judge is expected to rule any day, any day. We're waiting on his verdict. All I can say right now is the judge is extremely interested in this thing. He's extremely intelligent. He's following very, very closely the science and the scientific arguments. Some of the most pertinent parts of this trial is when the judge interrupted and asked his own questions. So we are very optimistic that the judge is going to rule that the deliberate addition of adding fluoride to the drinking water poses an unreasonable risk for brain development of children. Okay. Now, the reason I haven't gone into too much detail there, is that rather than for this audience pursuing to the nth degree the evidence that is getting close to the unarguable fact that fluoride damages the growing brain, you have to say, wait a moment, why are we doing this? What is the science of the benefits? And how do the science of the benefits stack up against the science of the risks that I've just discussed? Well, let's look at it. There's very little difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. Let me go through the science very quickly. Leverett in Science, 1982, they found that. Cahoon, 84, 85, 87. You can get all these references. I'm going to send them to Richard. Diesendorf in Nature, 1986. Gray, 1987. And then Brunel and Carlos, 1990. This was the largest survey of dental survey ever carried out in the United States. It was commissioned by the National Institute for Dental Research. They examined the teeth of over 39,000 children in 84 communities. An independent analysis by John Yamianis, a critic of fluoridation, he found that there was no significant difference in the decayed, missing, and filled teeth between children living all their lives in fluoridated or non-fluoridated communities, and those who live part of their lives in one or the other. Here is the DMFT for the children in this whole study. This is 39,000 children, and you see the graphs comparing the DMFT at various ages from 6 to 17 completely overlap. There is no statistical difference, significant. But Brunel and Carlos, to their credit, used a more sensitive measure of tooth decay. They didn't use DMFT, decayed, missing, and filled teeth. They used decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. That gives you 5 times the power, because there are approximately 5 surfaces to a tooth. They found the average for about 8,000 children who had lived all their life in a fluoridated community was 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surface. The average for a child, another 8,000 children lived all their life in a non-fluoridated community, 3.4. Subtract 2.8 from 3.4, and you get an absolute saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface. And I have to ask you, could you possibly justify lowering a child's IQ by 4 or 5 IQ points to save 0.6 of a tooth surface? Spencer in Australia found even lower savings, between 0.12 and 0.3 of a permanent tooth surface. De Liefde in New Zealand, reviewing the country's tooth decay there, the difference in tooth decay has been clinically meaningless in New Zealand. And they look at the tooth decay in every single child in New Zealand. In Ontario, Dr. David Locker reviewed, he said the effect is not large in absolute terms and is often statistically not statistically significant and may not be of clinical significance. Ontario. Now, some data that I think might interest this panel very much is that what you're looking at here is tooth decay in third graders by county. So those dots represent different counties, tooth decay in third graders in those different counties. And if I now put in the bottom axis, that is the percentage of each of those counties which are fluoridated. And as you see, as the fluoridation percentage of the fluoridation counties goes up, the tooth decay goes up, not down. If fluoridation worked, you'd expect a curve going down. There is a curve going down, and that is the relationship with the income levels, the average income levels in those counties. There you see the tooth decay coming down. And to state it, tooth decay has more to do with poverty than any other factor. Now, important, you know, I'm going to have to eliminate a few slides now. You will be able to get them from the internet or from the county, the city. There's an important study from Iowa which showed they measured the fluoride intake per individual and found there was no relationship between tooth decay and the amount of fluoride ingested by each child. There's the Cochrane review, which again didn't find very strong evidence. And there have since then been 2 studies from England commissioned by the UK government, the Catfish study and the Lotus study. And I will give you their conclusions. Reduction in effectiveness is likely to be due to the low caries prevalence seen following the widespread use of fluoride. Receipt of optimal, this is the second one, the receipt of optimal water fluoridation for 6 million patients in the NHS resulted in very small positive health effects, which may not be meaningful for individuals. The probable explanation for this weak evidence is one, the fluoride works topically, number one, and number two, fluoridated toothpaste is readily available. That's why we're not seeing any difference. If fluoride works primarily on the outside of the tooth, why swallow it? Why put it in the drinking water and force it on people who don't want it? And this is what a Nobel Prize winner said in 2010, I think, 2000. In pharmacology, if the effect, no, that's when he won the Nobel Prize. In pharmacology, if the effect is local, i.e. topical, it is awkward to use it in any other way than as a local treatment. I mean, this is obvious. You have the teeth there, they're available for you. Why drink the stuff? And he also said, Sweden rejected fluoridation in the 1970s. Our children have not suffered greater tooth decay, and in turn, our citizens have not borne the other hazards fluoride may cause. There are safer and cheaper ways of fighting tooth decay as practiced in Scotland. I'll leave you to read this for yourself. Suffice it to say that Scotland teaches toothbrushing in nursery schools, provides healthy snacks and drinks in school, provides dental health and dietary advice to both children and parents, and provides annual dental checkups and treatment if required, including fluoride vanishes. And tooth decay in Scotland, since this program, has come down faster than it has in New Zealand. In New Zealand, the average 8-year-old has 1.4 fillings. In Scotland, it's 0.6. In Scotland, the children with completely healthy teeth has gone up to 73%. In New Zealand, it's only gone up to 54%. And New Zealand has 40% of the country fluoridated. And it's cost effective. The summary and conclusions, let me go to the last statement. The last statement. Because I'm only summarizing what you've heard. I'll go to the last statement. I urge Binghamton to end fluoridation as soon as possible. You are not mandated by the state to fluoridate your water. Many communities in New York State do not fluoridate their water, including the whole of Long Island, including up the road, the university town of Ithaca. There is no need for Binghamton to do this, and I urge you, relook at this PowerPoint, discuss it amongst yourself, and as I said, if you want chapter and verse on the NTP review and the Tusker trial, the federal trial against the EPA, we can bring in Chris Neurath, we can bring in Michael Connick, my son, who was the lawyer for the Tusker lawsuit. So, bit of a rush, I'm sorry about that, but I'm now happy to answer any questions.
Probably missed most of what you were emphasizing about Sweden way back earlier.
Yes.
There was an impact, even though, so there was some kind of an impact to a stuff.
Yeah, the hip fractures.
I don't remember, were they pregnant women?
No, the study in Sweden, this is Helty 2021, the study looked at hip fractures in women, and the hip fractures, and they found that amongst post-menopausal women, where osteoporosis is the most serious, they found an increase in hip fractures in Sweden. Now, the whole of Sweden, they're not fluoridated. Now, they have one town that was fluoridated. They're not fluoridated. The range of natural levels is between 0 and 1 part per million. So you're finding an increase in hip fracture in Sweden at the levels at which we fluoridate in Binghamton.
They were finding that the incidence went up with the concentration of fluoride.
Yes, an association. Yes, they saw. I mean, the beauty of the study, again, it was individual measurements. You're looking at the water that pregnant women were exposed to in Sweden. And for the postmenopausal women, as that level of exposure went up, so did their risk of hip fracture.
So where was the exposure from?
Oh, naturally occurring.
Oh,
The naturally occurring, you know, typically the average water level in non-fluoridated areas is about 0.15.
okay, the different water supplies would have different.
Yeah, it depends
levels.
upon which rocks the water has flown through. It's completely a vagary of where you get your water from.
Yeah, that was the case in all of China, right, where they had
Yeah,
those
yeah.
naturally high fluoridation levels.
It can go up as high as 10 parts per million in China, India, parts of Iran. And that's where the studies have been done, because the people are sick. They want to know what levels are causing.
Another quick question.
Go ahead.
Didn't they drop the level of fluoridation, back, maybe it was a late.
I think it was
90s?
2008.
2015,
2015.
From 1 to 0.7, right?
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
And Binghamton right now does it at 0.7, which
Yeah.
is the recommendation by the CDC.
Okay.
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is, but they can go up a little higher than that because of the vagaries. But yeah, it was done in 2015.
Well, our city's water quality report says that they do it at 0.7.
Good.
And they
Well,
cite the
better than one.
CDC
Yes,
as,
and the reason that the CDC dropped the levels is because the only thing that they follow, the CDC, is dental fluorosis, damage to the enamel. And this was expected to be, when they started, expected about 10% of the kids would have dental fluorosis in its mildest form. Now in the United States, we've got about 60% of kids living in fluoridated areas now have dental fluorosis, and not all in its very mild state. So that's why the CDC said we better drop the fluoride
Well,
exposure.
we don't know what, the
Yeah.
CDC is not a transparent agency.
But that's ostensibly what they said, is to protect against dental fluorosis. They completely ignored the fact that it was also causing brain damage. And since they dropped it in 2015, this is when these high quality NIEH funded IQ studies, and those are occurring lower than the levels which cause dental fluorosis. And that was a big thing. In 2014, we took one of the Chinese researchers to the EPA's headquarters and said, look, you are saying now that the most sensitive endpoint to fluoride is dental fluorosis, not crippling skeletal fluorosis, which is you said in 1986. But by about 2014, they were talking about dental fluorosis being the most severe dental fluorosis. That's what the NRC said in 2006, severe dental fluorosis. I said, now you're looking at severe dental fluorosis. I said, but if you look at and our Chinese researcher confirmed, if you look at all the children whose IQ has been lowered, not all of them had severe dental fluorosis. Some of them had moderate dental fluorosis. Some of them had mild dental fluorosis. Some of them had very mild dental fluorosis. So, in other words, lowering of IQ should be the most sensitive endpoint of fluoride exposure.
Or perhaps for some people, thyroid function.
Yeah,
Or
it could be.
enzymes.
Yeah.
You know, it could vary.
Absolutely.
So what you're saying is by lowering it to 0.7 did bring down severe dental fluorosis.
Well, I think, yes, I think the surveys done by the CDC since, I think they found it's going down a bit.
So the question is,
They haven't produced any surveys since
No,
2015.
no.
the one question is
No,
why,
not on dental fluorosis, not from the government. Actually, Cook just came out with a report, was the Cochrane review.
Yeah,
They just came out 2 months or maybe in April
okay,
on dental fluorosis, and what they said, and they're quite respected. You can
very highly
look
respected.
up PubMed Science Direct, you'll find them. Cochrane report, the Cochrane collaboration, dental fluorosis, and what I think their finding was that the studies had been so poor, they couldn't make an accurate assessment.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's, well, what is so sad is that the EPA, and this is why we had to sue them,
I can
the
send it to you.
EPA has not
Well,
attempted
You
a
can
new
get
health risk
Cochrane,
assessment
you'll
based
get it,
upon,
you'll get a dental
well,
fluorosis.
any of these things, not based upon thyroid function, based upon hip fractures, based upon IQ. They're just not doing their job. They're letting down the public.
And it's very sad because pregnant women are not being informed. It might be because they're frightened that this will be too frightening for pregnant women, that it's too much, oh my God, they'll get so upset. And of course they'll get upset, but how do you deal with it? Allow pregnant women to continue drinking fluoridated water? There needs to be some intervention here, and a community at a local level can do it. But it is a very, very worrying proposition.
And also that brings up another issue, which I didn't mention, it's the environmental justice issue. Because when you say, oh, pregnant women shouldn't be drinking fluoridated water, well, how does a woman of low income pay for bottled water or reverse osmosis?
right?
Or lug home bottles of water if they don't have a car? How do they get the
So
well?
our pregnant women are not being protected.
No, they're not.
They're not.
In
Oh, the
fact,
offspring.
we could make a list of the groups in the population that are most likely to be more adversely affected And that is an issue of
fetus.
environmental injustice.
Yeah.
That would include, let me know if I leave anything out, low income,
Yes.
as
Yeah.
you said. The developing fetus,
Yeah, absolutely.
children,
Infants, yeah.
Bottle fed
Bottle fed.
infants.
bottle-fed
Very, very-
infants.
They're
Well,
the
I'm
most
saying,
impacted, it appears.
I'm saying children, so
Yeah.
infants and children,
Yeah.
after they stop bottle fed,
Yeah.
they're drinking like. Or bottle fed if the formula is made with the fluoridated water. Adolescents, which we find the fluorosis.
Well, active, very active, sportsmen who, people who are playing football
Drink a lot of
or
water.
baseball, they drink a lot of water. Workers who work outside,
The NRC 2006 report identified those high water drinking subsets. And one of them again was pregnant women. Drink a lot of water. When you're pregnant, somehow you drink a lot of water.
Diabetics,
And military
Diabetics, yeah,
people,
definitely.
diabetics,
military personnel.
outdoor laborers.
And as
And there's a
we've
whole
seen-
group of people who drink more water than others.
and even an average amount of water for a person with hypothyroidism.
Look at the outdoor workers here in Binghamton during the last few weeks. How hot has it been? Very hot.
And the elderly because of the brittle bone situation, hip fractures.
Here's one that might make you smile. University students. Now, there's a limit on how much water you can drink, but for a university student, the amount of beer that they can drink, there's no limit. There is absolutely no limit, based upon a professor's experience, there is absolutely no limit to a student at university drinking beer. And if that beer is made in the fluoridated community, like most of the beer around here, I think it's made in Utica, that's fluoridated. So
Yeah, I
you
don't
get,
think they use reverse osmosis before they do
I
that.
don't know.
I know they
They
should.
should-
do.
they
Yeah.
should do.
Coca-Cola, I mean, we have, that's, now, people drinking sodas, where is the soda made?
And look at Ireland, Dublin is fluoridated, that's the home of Guinness. How much Guinness the average Irishman drinks is off the chart.
Plus our food, like if you buy a frozen lasagna or something, that lasagna was probably cooked in fluoridated water.
Yeah. And some things like
soda pop
rice
and
and pasta.
Rice.
Reconstituted drinks from concentrated orange juice, they just use the municipal water supply.
But it's, Richard, it's such nonsense. It doesn't take a PhD, it doesn't take 28 years of research to conclude if the best benefit they can show is 0.6 of one tooth surface. These are not the risks that we should be taking. It's unnecessary. Countries that don't fluoridate their water, like Sweden, have not shown any detriment to their teeth of their children.
I think the big problem is, Paul, is that no one in the country on a public health level is willing to put in the effort to produce something like what they're doing in Scotland. It takes a lot of effort to do it, a lot of commitment
And
from the
education.
teacher, a terrific amount of commitment, and more commitment than money.
And that's where I think Binghamton should make its reputation, not by being another town. A lot of towns have stopped fluoridation, not putting it on the emphasis, another town stopping fluoridation, but rather a town that is pioneering an equitable solution, especially for low-income families, which is where the toothache is concentrated. That's where you can make your
I
reputation.
really like that child smart approach.
Oh,
It's very nice because they work with the moms, about snacks, at a very, very young age. When they talk about nursery school in England, it's like from 2 years on, even a little younger.
yeah.
It's a little
Well,
different. We don't have it
Darius,
here.
and Darius, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I think that the system that Scotland uses is very, I don't know, seems very innovative compared to the fluoride system that we currently have. And I think there's definitely a lot for us to look into.
I didn't catch what the.
Could you repeat it? The sound quality is.
Yeah,
not
it's
too
very
great.
fuzzy, unfortunately.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know if that's something with my computer or what that is. Is that a little better?
A little better.
A little bit.
The
Yeah.
sound is a little distorted. It's not you.
Yeah,
Okay.
talk slowly so the echoing doesn't like overlap with what you're saying. That's
Yeah.
I think that'll help, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know, looking into introducing something like close to the Scotland system or closer to the Scotland system would be something worth, you know, for us on the committee to evaluate and see if that's something that's possible to recommend to the commission. And just like evaluating the harm that fluoride has done in the you know, our community. I think it's something worth looking into. And you know, it seems like there's a lot of merit to everything that you've said. And thank you for coming here and presenting all this information to us. I think this is very useful stuff.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Darius is
for inviting me.
also, in addition to being a member of our committee, is also a student of environmental science at the.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Oh, boy, this is terrific. That makes it worth my coming just to have someone of your credentials listen to this. One of the things I think is important about the Child Smile program, it's one of the reasons it's cost effective, is that the most expensive thing to treat in infants as far as tooth decay is concerned is baby bottle tooth decay, BBDC, tooth decay, baby bottle tooth decay. This is when a baby is allowed to suck on a bottle of milk, fruit juice, sugared water, even Coca-Cola, where the bottle is treated as a pacifier. Shove it in there and we let the baby suck on it for hours. Now, any person can recognize baby bottle tooth decay. The primary teeth, the top primary teeth rot to the gums, whereas the bottom teeth are practically untouched. So the bottle itself protects bottom teeth. It's the top teeth that get exposed to sugar for hours and so on, rots to the gum. The beauty of the Child Smile program, it gives these program organizers, the dentists and teachers and so on, a chance to educate the mother not to bottle feed their babies in this way, you know, not for very long. And that is the reason that the Child Smile program is cost effective. It's to take, what happens with baby bottle tooth decay is those top teeth have to be taken out under anesthesia at the local hospital.
That's the cost.
And that's a very expensive thing to do. But it's unnecessary again if the parents are educated on that. We need education, not fluoridation.
Paul and I were lucky enough, we went up to Scotland. We went up and visited, we made an appointment and we spent a few hours with the team there, with the director and with her associates. And they were very good. They answered all our questions. And I couldn't understand, they kept talking about health equity. This is a term as an American I've never really heard here. Have you heard health equity mentioned? Or
No, I haven't.
and I really didn't know what it meant, what they meant by it. And they explained it to me and they said, oh, everybody knows that here because we had a prime minister in Scotland, or the equivalent of the Scottish PM, who was very keen on getting health equity for all Scottish people. And that was fairness and everybody had the right to all kind of medical help, advice and care, good health care. And this came under that purview, which was why they did not want fluoridation and they came up with this other program.
Yeah, their attitude to this, like to amplifying what you said, their attitude to this dental care, it was the opening of infant health care. It wasn't just teeth. This was the beginning, the access to parents to a whole plethora of health benefits. For example, if you have too much sugar, the kids are going to get obese. If the kids get obese, they've got to increase their chance of getting diabetes. That's another huge cost on the healthcare system. So by looking after this, getting it right from the very beginning in terms of diet and hygiene pays huge dividends down.
But
down-
there's an enormous commitment to it, and actually, they did say that it wasn't cheaper than fluoridation.
No, probably not the cost of the program, right?
Yeah.
But when you count in the avoidance of the operations under anesthetic for baby bottle tooth decay. That's where I think the savings go. The big save.
But it's really worth it, you know. We need to have some type of venue to educate, continuing education for people in communities, and especially for very vulnerable populations in our
You know,
communities. We don't
because
really have it.
Ellen and I worked on this Endicott lithium-ion battery incinerator, which we helped to stop. We had great access to a lot of activists in Endicott and some in Binghamton. And I really urge you, with any of the issues, any of the problem solving that you do, to think of recruiting those activists to be part of what you're trying to achieve. Don't try to achieve it alone. Get your activists out there.
But every issue creates
with
new
this-
activists, so you'll be creating new activists.
Yeah, and
We have a water quality task force on our committee, and people may be wondering why we're starting with fluoridation. And
Yeah.
to me, it just made the most sense to start with something that you can just not put in.
Yeah,
rather
just
than
turn off the
have
tap.
to worry about the contaminants that are in there that we want to try to take out.
Yes.
So much, it may be harder because of the public relations and authoritarian agencies that we have, but in terms of doing it, it's easy not to put it in. It's much harder to get it out once it's in. You have to have.
It's also easy to put it in, and that's why they're doing it.
Well,
right?
yeah,
Because they think it's an easy fix, right?
Accepting most water at your water department, the guys who run it, they don't want to put it in. It's very, very dangerous. Very dangerous.
For them, they get exposed to hydrogen fluoride fumes in there.
Most do not want, I mean, our major opponents to fluoridation in every community is the water department.
Yeah.
Interesting,
guys-
because they don't want to deal with it.
Scott, I remember when we first had our first meeting of the full commission, you said that you had some kind of a special interest in water. Yes,
Yes, I do.
can
Sure.
you tell us a little bit about?
Well, I've done a few different types of water monitoring over the years. The first one had to do with getting baseline data of our watersheds. Because this goes back to when fracking was a threat.
Oh, yeah.
And we wanted to find out what our water sheds were like,
Mhm.
so that in the event that fracking came along and there were incidents, we could point, this is what this was before. We measured strontium and barium, which are natural, but they come up from deep in the ground.
Mhm.
So you're gonna find more of that if there's drilling
Oh, okay.
and conductivity. Those were the primary measures. And we had over 100 people involved from Western New York all along. It was a southern tier issue because that's where they were looking at doing the fracking in New York. And that data is all uploaded on the database through another organization we work with called Alarm.
It's good. You could do something similar for fluoride. You could do a non-invasive test on individuals. Get urine samples and find out, get a handle on what the urinary fluoride levels are in Binghamton. A lot of pregnant people, when they go to their doctors, may give urine samples for something. You can check that out.
How would you have access?
Well, you could ask, you'd have to get a grant. And
Interesting.
you could ask that, could they just add fluoride to what they're testing for? They might test for iron or I don't know what. I think pregnant women do give urine samples at different times when they visit
Yeah.
a doctor, and it would be the perfect timing just for Binghamton area woman to get in that sample, just add fluoride to the test.
You know, before we leave the fracking issue, one of the things that shocked me, I went to a conference in Chicago, and there were quite a number of doctors there. And their concern was the health of the workers in the fracking industry. And I found out from them that in fracking, they inject, amongst other horrible chemicals, hydrofluoric acid. They
Yeah.
pump hydrofluoric acid down, which dissolves the rocks to release what they want in the fracking.
They do that in California.
Hydrofluoric acid. If you ask any worker in industry, the most frightening chemical to handle is hydrogen fluoride, hydrofluoric acid. You get a little bit on your flesh, it's right through your flesh. And if you don't reduce the exposure very, very quickly, you're going to be dead. That fluoride gets into the bloodstream, very high levels, and switches off the heart muscle. That's what kills people. So people, ask any chemist that you know in industry about hydrofluoric acid. Anyway, they inject that crap down to dissolve the rocks to get the
That was
oil
a
or
good
whatever.
study you did for the Southern Tier,
Yes, thank you.
baseline studies. Thank God they banned it.
Well, so,
So-
as of now, it's still there,
Is-
yes.
You know that when I found out I was fighting a hazardous waste incinerator in Pennsylvania. And people were puzzled in the area as to why a hospital had been built out in this rural area, not in Pittsburgh or a big city. There's a big hospital was being built, private hospital. It was being built for the fracking industry. So they could look after the health of the workers in this industry.
Is that Dimick?
What?
You know, Dimick, Pennsylvania? You know,
Right? It's
they
very,
upgraded the hospital, I know
yeah,
that.
it's very close to the border.
Yeah, it's probably,
It's the same.
well, no, I should say Montrose.
Yes, that's about, I think
That's where
that's
the
where we
hospital
went
is,
down
but it's
to
near-
talk on this hazardous waste. That's where they were building a hospital, or upgrading it. So
Well, that may be a topic for the future, but I want to end the meeting.
Yeah,
so
okay.
we can,
yeah.
close out here. Do you have anything else to say, Darius?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think it leaves us with a lot to look over. And I'd just like to thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And
So I thank you too, both.
thank you, Scott.
I came with an idea that fluoridation is helping dental health. I'm not feeling that it's worth it after hearing what you shared with us,
Well, thank you.
and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And yes, all the other impacts are rather troublesome.
Yeah, I had a discussion earlier with Paul and when I was reading up on this and he was giving me a brief, I compared it to my experience when I was at the University of Wisconsin. When I met a professor there, Nellie Lachlan, who was doing primate research with lead poisoning. And she found in the rhesus monkeys that she used that the effects of lead poisoning were that they disrupted the menstrual cycle of the monkeys.
Yeah.
And that effect was seen at 1% of the level that we usually associate with the symptoms of lead poisoning. So if you're looking at the wrong symptoms, like they would just want to look at the severe fluorosis, they're missing all the things, all the other symptoms that could be occurring at lower levels, including some symptoms that might not have been discovered yet or associated with fluoride.
And it's absolutely true. And when you talk about interfering with the menstrual cycle, did you say? Yeah.
Yes,
Well, you're talking about hormones. The problem of chemicals which interfere with hormones is that hormones are designed to function at extremely low levels. We're talking parts per billion to parts per trillion. So when a chemical comes along which mimics a natural hormone, you don't need much of that chemical to have an effect. And that was the shock the dioxins brought to the table. Very low level, causing problems.
And as you mentioned, the thyroid stimulating hormone, that comes from the pituitary gland. And it's produced when the pituitary gland sees that the thyroid is not producing enough hormone. It tries to stimulate it to produce more, but it doesn't work because the gland is not able to do it. So it keeps producing it, and this high level of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is therefore the marker.
This is when I get a
Hypothyroidism.
little bit jealous of you, Richard, because my expertise is really biochemistry.
I'm the biologist.
But I wish that I knew more about the way that hormones talk to each other. It
Yeah.
gets very
There's a
complex.
feedback.
The feedback
Yes.
loops, and it's positive and negative. Oh my God, you see these diagrams. It's much more complicated than biochemistry.
Endocrinology and immunology, like I think two of the most fascinating. parts of
Absolutely,
biology.
yeah.
How they said, one last thing, because I'm always looking at these studies, is that because our official agencies protect fluoridation and we don't fund many really good studies on fluoride, not until these mother offspring studies, which have been wonderful, unexpected and wonderful. But China has gone full steam ahead on trying to understand the mechanisms
Oh, yeah.
fluoride's toxicity, neurotoxicity, all of it, and they're way ahead of us.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the really great articles are coming out of China. We're not doing it because we're not funding our scientists to do this type of research because fluoride is safe and effective.
When you want a nervous breakdown,
Basically.
go to the Chinese literature and look at some of their mechanistic studies.
Yeah, very
of
good.
How switching on this gene and that gene interferes with this and that. It's
They're
great.
pumping it out all the time because China and India are well known to have they're called endemic fluorosis areas, very high levels of fluoride. Chinese actually have been very good. They literally spent billions moving people. I guess they came to the understanding that it was better to move people than to try to deal with the water. It would be too expensive to constantly deal with lowering that fluoride level. They moved him out of these very high fluoride areas. They've been really, really good on it. India's been pretty disgraceful. And another high area we don't often talk about, Paul, is like the Ethiopian Rift, the Rift Valley. A lot of African countries have very high fluoride levels also.
Yeah.
So, and we have our high fluoride, we have some high fluoride levels in Vermont. But mainly they're in the west. We have some pretty high levels out in some of these non-populated western states.
Can we, Darius, can we have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
Second, all in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have to travel, you have to travel back to.
Not today, not today.
Well, tomorrow's not a good day
No,
for travel.
no. We got to go down to New Jersey,
Yeah, it's.
pick up a friend of hers
I
and
was
drive her
like,
back.
"Oh,
to us.
just.
Oh,
So we have a lot of driving over the next couple of days.
well, you should look at the weather
It's
forecast for
from
tomorrow.
from that hurricane?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh dear.
What's that?
The weather tomorrow, we're going to be driving towards New Jersey. That's going to be bad.
Well, better to travel today than tomorrow. Yeah, the hurricane's coming up
Really?
this way.
Oh, yikes.
I mean, rain, we're not getting
Yeah.
a hurricane, we're getting the rain.
Yeah. Lot
Lots
of
of
rain.
How,
Thanks for the video.
even though we don't live there anymore, somehow I still get these weather alerts for Broome County.
Thank you very much. Whitman behaved itself beautifully.
I got a few, in the last few days. Did you have bad weather here?
Thanks so much.
Oh.
Yeah, we set off.
A joy to get someone listening.
Thunderstorms.
Serious. There's people listening to you and there's serious people
All right.
listening.
I heard the story before.